You know what your problem is? You make everything feel like it means something. I said that to her on a Tuesday afternoon in October, in the parking lot of a coffee shop we'd been going to for 2 years, with my keys in my hand and my heart doing something it had no business doing. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me. That specific way she had, the one I'd spent months pretending didn't do anything to me. And then she tilted her head slightly to the left, the way she always did when she was deciding whether to say the thing she actually thought, or the thing that would keep the peace. She chose the thing she actually thought. "You've been staring at me for the last 40 minutes, she said. "And when I caught you, you looked away like you'd touched something hot. So maybe before you critique my problem, you should figure out what yours is." Then she smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a cruel one. Just a smile that said, "I see you. I've been seeing you. And I've been patient enough to wait for you to see yourself." I got in my car and drove home with my hands at 10 and 2, like I'd learned in driver's ed, like everything was fine, like my entire understanding of myself hadn't just shifted 2 inches to the left and refused to shift back. That was the moment I knew I was in serious trouble. But if I'm going to tell you this story properly, if you're really going to understand how I ended up standing in a parking lot accusing my best friend of making things feel like they meant something, I have to take you back to before I knew her name. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. I was 31 when I moved to Portland. Not the romantic kind of 31. Not the kind you see in movies where a woman walks away from something bad and walks toward something brilliant with excellent lighting and a great coat. I was the other kind. The kind where you pack your life into a storage unit on a Saturday, cry in the parking lot for 20 minutes because you don't know if you're sad or just tired, and then drive a rented van across 3 states alone because asking for help feels harder than doing it yourself. I'd taken a job at an architecture firm I respected more than I liked. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator that the landlord kept promising to fix. I knew 2 people in the city. My college roommate Dana, who I saw maybe twice a month, and my coworker Priya, who was friendly in the way that office people are friendly when they're testing whether you're worth the investment. The first time I saw her was at a farmer's market, which is exactly the kind of sentence that belongs in a movie I would have rolled my eyes at before I lived it. Her name was Sloane. She was standing at a honey stall, reading the label on a jar with the focused expression of someone who takes labels seriously. She was wearing a brown canvas jacket and had her dark hair pulled back in a way that meant she hadn't thought about it much that morning, and it had come out looking exactly right anyway, the way some people manage effortlessly and the rest of us spend 20 minutes failing at. She wasn't doing anything remarkable. She was just reading a honey jar. I don't know why I kept looking. I told myself it was because she reminded me of someone. I spent the walk home trying to figure out who, which should have told me everything, because she didn't remind me of anyone. She just reminded me of the feeling of standing somewhere quiet and suddenly not wanting to leave. I forgot about her by Monday. At least I thought I did. The second time I saw her was 3 weeks later, at a bookstore I'd started visiting on Sunday mornings because the coffee was good and the noise level was exactly right. Enough ambient sound to feel less alone. Not so much that I couldn't think. I was in the architecture section, as I always was, and she was 2 aisles over in what turned out to be the nature writing section, and I only noticed her because I heard her laugh at something she was reading. It was a low, surprised laugh. The kind that escapes before you've decided to let it. I told myself not to look around the shelf. Then I looked around the shelf. She was standing with one hand holding a book open and one hand pressed over her mouth like she was trying to contain the laugh. And her eyes were bright in the way eyes get when something actually lands. She looked up. Not at me. Just up. The way you do when something good happens and you want to share it with the nearest ceiling. And then she looked down again and kept reading. I went back to my book. I did not retain a single word of it. The 3rd time was the coffee shop. A Tuesday, early December. I was sitting alone with a cappuccino and a set of revised drawings that needed to be client-ready by Thursday, and I had my headphones in, which is universally understood as a social barrier, and she sat down across from me anyway. Not at my table. The tables were small and close, and the place was full, and she sat at the one directly beside mine, which meant we were essentially sharing space whether we intended to or not. I glanced up. She glanced over. "Sorry," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "It's a Tuesday. Everywhere is full." "It's fine. I'll be quiet." She wasn't, though. Not aggressively not quiet. She didn't play music or take a loud phone call or do anything that would have given me permission to be annoyed. She was just present. She ordered tea and opened a paperback, and after about 20 minutes she made a small sound, not quite a word, more like a that I recognized as the sound of reading something that doesn't sit right, the kind of thing you do when you're thinking out loud by accident. I took out one headphone. "Good or bad?" She looked up. She recognized me. I could see it, a brief recalibration, and then something that might have been interest. "Neither. The character just made a choice I don't believe." "What kind of choice?" "She walked away from the person who knew her best because it was the easier option." She tilted the book toward me so I could see the cover. "I've never believed that people actually choose ease over truth. I think they choose what's comfortable over what's real, which is different." I didn't have an answer for that, not a fast one. "I'm Sloane," she said. "Jamie. You're here every Tuesday." "So are you, apparently." "I noticed you first," she said, with the directness of someone who has simply decided that honesty is more efficient than the alternative. "You always sit by the window. You always look like you're solving something." "I'm an architect," I said. "I'm usually solving something." She smiled. It wasn't the smile from the bookstore. It was quieter than that, and for reasons I didn't examine at the time, it landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. "I work with urban planning," she said. "Parks, mostly. Green space in cities. You're trying to make cities more human. You're trying to make buildings worth living inside." She picked her tea back up. "We're probably doing the same thing from different ends." After she left, I sat for another 40 minutes without touching my drawings. That was how it started. Not with a bang. Not with drama. With a honey jar and a bookshelf laugh and a Tuesday afternoon that felt, somehow, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. We started meeting on purpose after that. Tuesdays, same coffee shop, same rough time. She started sitting at my table instead of the one beside it. I started leaving my headphones in my bag. We talked about work, about the city, about the things that interested us. She liked early American landscape architecture and terrible reality television, which she described as field work in the study of social performance. I told her about growing up in Ohio, about the architecture program I almost didn't finish, about the relationship I'd left before the move that I still wasn't entirely sure how to talk about. I didn't think about the honey jar. I didn't think about the bookstore laugh. I thought, I've made a friend. A good one. The kind that comes along rarely. That feels less like meeting someone new and more like remembering someone you forgot you knew. That was what I told myself. For a very long time, that was the only story I allowed myself to tell. It was small things at first. The way I started noticing when she'd responded to a message, checking without meaning to. The way you check the weather when you're hoping for something specific. The way I registered the particular quality of her attention. The way she listened like what you were saying actually mattered. Not performing interest, but genuinely curious. Following threads. Asking the follow-up question that proved she'd been paying attention 10 minutes ago and not just waiting for her turn. Dana noticed before I noticed anything was different. We were at her kitchen table in January, splitting a bottle of wine on a Friday because neither of us had the social energy for bars anymore, and she asked how I was liking Portland, and I said it had gotten better, and she said better how, and I said I'd met someone. Dating? She asked, with the careful tone of someone who knows how to ask a question without quite asking it. No, a friend. Sloane. She does urban planning, green spaces. She's working on this project for the East Side that... I stopped, because Dana was looking at me with an expression I recognized and didn't want to be on the receiving end of. What? Nothing. She refilled her glass. You just lit up. Because the project is interesting. Uh-huh. It genuinely is. They're redesigning. Jamie. She said it gently. I'm not arguing with you. You lit up. I'm noting it. I finished my wine. I did not pursue the subject. I filed Dana's observation under the category of things people say when they want your life to be more interesting than it is, and moved on. The problem with that category is that it has a weight limit. In February, Sloane and I started a habit of walking on Sunday mornings. Not organized, not planned as a recurring thing at first. Just one Sunday when we ran into each other near the park and walked for 2 hours and ended up at the same bakery we'd both apparently been meaning to try. After that, it just kept happening. There's a specific intimacy in walking with someone that's different from sitting across a table from them. You're not performing attention. You're just moving through space together, and the conversation comes and goes without pressure. And sometimes you're quiet for a few minutes, and it doesn't mean anything is wrong. The first time we were quiet for a while, I became aware of her proximity in a way that I hadn't been at the coffee shop. The specific distance between us, the way it adjusted naturally when the path narrowed, the fact that our walking pace matched without either of us adjusting on purpose. Small things. Physical things. The kind of data point that your body files and your brain refuses to process. I started noticing what made her laugh. Not the categories. Not she laughs at clever things, or she laughs at absurdity. But the actual specific things, the precise moment in a sentence when the laugh started, the way it was different depending on whether she'd seen it coming or been caught off guard, the surprised one that escaped before she intended it, the slower one when something built, the very quiet one when she was genuinely delighted and somehow wanted to keep it for a moment before sharing it. I noticed these things the way you notice the furniture arrangement in a room you spend a lot of time in, not analyzing, just knowing. I told myself that was what it was. Familiarity. The texture of a friendship that was becoming genuinely close. The night that cracked that story open was the second Saturday of March. Her building had a water issue. A pipe, 3rd floor, the kind of minor emergency that made her apartment uninhabitable for a weekend. And she'd asked if she could stay with me. Of course she could. She brought a bag and a bottle of wine, and we ordered pizza and watched a documentary about national parks that she'd been meaning to see, and I hadn't known I wanted to until she recommended it. It was a good night. Easy. The best kind. At around midnight, we were both tired, and the movie had been over for an hour, and we'd been talking since. One of those conversations that keep producing the next thing to say, that keep branching and deepening past the point where you expected them to slow down. There was a moment when the conversation landed on a pause. She was sitting at one end of the couch and I was at the other, and I'd turned toward her slightly during the last thread of the conversation, and she was looking at me with that particular look. The one I'd learned. The one where she was deciding between the safe answer and the real one, and she opened her mouth to say something. Then she changed her mind. I should sleep, she said. You have drawings to finish tomorrow. I have until Thursday. Still, she smiled. It was the wrong smile, the one she used when she was covering the right one. I knew the difference by then, and the fact that I knew the difference suddenly felt significant in a way I wasn't ready to handle. She took the guest room. I lay in my own bed for an hour with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, replaying the pause, replaying the almost sentence she'd stopped herself from finishing. I told myself, you're reading into things that aren't there. I told myself, you have a good friend who stayed over. That's it. I kept telling myself these things, methodically, in the dark. The way you keep pressing on a bruise to confirm that yes, it still hurts. Yes, it's still there. Yes, something has happened that you can't quite explain yet. By morning, I had convinced myself that I'd imagined it. But something had shifted. I felt it for days afterward, not in any way I could point to, but in the way you feel a room is different after someone's been in it. Sloan was the same. The coffee shop was the same. Our Tuesday table was the same. The problem was me. I had started to hear my own rationalizations. That's the thing about the moment when the story you've been telling yourself starts to come apart. You don't have the grace of obliviousness anymore. You have to actively rebuild the denial each time, and rebuilding it takes effort, and effort leaves evidence, and eventually the evidence becomes harder to ignore than the thing you were hiding from in the first place. She made a comment one Tuesday about someone she'd gone on a date with the previous week, a woman she'd met through a mutual friend. They'd had dinner, she said. It was fine. The conversation was pleasant. She didn't think she'd see her again. What was wrong with her? I asked, and my voice came out lighter than I felt. Sloan considered this. Nothing wrong, just not present somehow, like she was performing the date instead of being on it. Have you met people like that? Yeah. I don't know how to explain it better than that. You can tell within about 4 minutes whether someone is actually with you in the room or just going through the right movements. I looked down at my coffee, and she was going through the movements. She was very pleasant, Sloan said. I just kept thinking about other conversations I wanted to be having. She looked at me when she said that last part, just briefly. Then she looked away. I did not ask whose conversations. I spent 3 days trying to convince myself there was nothing to ask about. That was March. By April, I had a word I was refusing to use. The thing about a word you refuse to use is that silence shapes itself around it. You stop yourself from saying it so many times that the silences start to add up, and eventually the shape of all those stopped sentences becomes visible, and visible things have a way of demanding to be looked at. I went back to basics. I made myself a list, internal, unwritten, repeated at intervals like a private pledge of allegiance, of all the reasons the word didn't apply, all the evidence for the alternative interpretation, all the perfectly logical explanations for why I thought about her the way I thought about her. She was my best friend in a city where I'd started from scratch. Of course I valued her. Of course her presence felt significant. Close friendships feel significant. That's not a diagnosis. That's just what good friendship is. I kept the list going for about 6 weeks. In late April, she came with me to see a building I'd been working on. A residential complex with a green roof and an interior courtyard. Nothing flashy, but a design I was genuinely proud of. It was a site visit, technical, not glamorous, and she'd asked if she could come because the green space component interested her professionally. We walked the courtyard, and she asked the right questions, the kind that proved she understood what she was looking at. And at one point I was explaining the water circulation system, and I turned to see if she was following, and she was watching my face instead of the diagram I was gesturing at. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry. You get different when you talk about something you've actually made. Different how? Like you believe in things. She said it simply, without weight, as if it were obvious. You're careful in conversation. You choose words. But when you talk about your work, you stop editing yourself and just say what you actually think. I looked at the diagram. I probably talked too much about it. Jamie. She waited until I looked at her. I drove 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning to see a courtyard. I don't think you're talking too much about it. I looked at her face. I looked at it for 1 second longer than I was supposed to. Then I said, "The drainage runs south," and pointed at the far corner, and she nodded, and we kept walking. In the car on the way back, she put on the radio, and neither of us talked much, and I kept my eyes on the road, and the whole city felt slightly too bright. And I thought, this is what it means to care about someone too much to trust yourself around them. This is the specific weight of knowing something about yourself and not being ready to do anything about it. My coworker Priya, who had graduated from pleasant office colleague to actual friend over the winter, asked me about Sloan over lunch in early May. "Are you two—" she started. "No," I said. "I didn't finish." "I know what you were going to ask." She picked up her fork. "And you answered very fast." "Because the answer is fast." "Okay." She didn't look convinced. "What's the answer?" "She's my friend." "Right. She is. Jamie." Priya set down her fork. She had a way of saying my name that meant she was about to be genuinely honest with me. "I've met Sloan twice. Both times you watched her talk the way people watch someone they like, in a way that has nothing to do with friendship. I'm not asking you to tell me I'm right. I'm just— Is everything okay?" I said yes. I changed the subject. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing structural calculations and telling myself that other people's perceptions were not evidence of anything. The most exhausting thing about a feeling you won't name is the maintenance. You have to keep patching it. Every crack that appears has to be sealed before it can spread. Every moment of almost knowing has to be rerouted, reframed, returned to the safe interpretation. You get tired of the maintenance before you're ready to stop doing it. The night I got truly tired was in May, a Thursday, late. We'd been at Sloane's apartment. She'd cooked, which she did sometimes, the domestic kind of ease that had grown between us without either of us deciding to build it. And we'd been talking for hours, and at some point around 11 she'd gotten quieter, and I'd asked what she was thinking, and she'd said, that I'm going to miss this when things change. What things? She looked at her hands. Things change. That's all I meant. A pause. You could get offered a project somewhere else. I could get the grant I applied for in Seattle. Life has a way of— I'm not planning to leave. I know. Still looking at her hands. I just think about it sometimes. About this being temporary. The way good things sometimes are. There was something in the way she said it. Something careful and pained that I recognized because I'd been carrying the same thing for months, just under a different name. I wanted to ask her what she meant. Specifically, directly. I wanted to ask her what this was. What she was afraid of losing. What she was actually saying under the sentence she'd chosen to say. I didn't. I said, "It's not going anywhere," and meant it about the friendship, and was aware in the moment of saying it that I was choosing the safe container deliberately. She nodded. "Okay." Small, private smile. I know. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and sat with the car in silence after the light turned green for long enough that the car behind me honked twice, gentle, and I blinked and drove. I thought, you cannot keep doing this. I thought, she said, this, like she meant something specific, and you let it go, and you keep letting it go, and one day she's going to stop saying things carefully and start saying them plainly, and you're not going to be ready. I thought, what if the thing you're afraid of isn't what you feel for her? What if the thing you're afraid of is what you're giving up by not saying it? That thought had edges. I sat with it for 3 days. But before we go on, if you've made it this far, then something in this story is landing somewhere real. That moment when you know something you haven't said yet, when it's sitting in your chest like a held breath, you know exactly what I mean. So hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one are worth sharing. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and turn on notifications. That way YouTube lets you know when the next story drops here on the channel. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever known something about your own feelings before you were ready to admit it to yourself? How long did you wait before you said it out loud? Tell me. I read every single one. And let me know what city you're watching from. I'll drop a heart. Now, let's get back to Jamie. 3 weeks after the Thursday at Sloane's apartment, I tried to pull back. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a rupture or an announced decision. I just started being less available. Replied to messages a few hours later instead of immediately. Said I was busy on a Tuesday when I wasn't. Told myself I was recalibrating, creating productive distance, giving myself room to sort through what I was feeling before it got more complicated. What I was actually doing was treating the thing I felt like a problem to be managed instead of a truth to be lived with, and I think somewhere I knew that, but I wasn't ready to stop yet. The thing about pulling back from someone who knows you is that they notice. And Sloane noticed. She didn't say anything directly at first. She gave me space, which is its own kind of information. The kind that says, I see what you're doing, and I'm going to respect it, even though it costs me something. A week passed, then 2. Our Tuesday was brief and surface level. The kind of coffee where we covered the things you cover when you're being careful with each other. And I drove home afterward feeling worse than I had before. At the end of May, she texted, Are you okay? I said, Yes, just slammed with work. Which was partially true. She said, Okay, I'm here if that changes. 5 words, and I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after, because I'm here if that changes is not a nothing sentence. It's the sentence you say when you already suspect something has changed and you're leaving the door unlocked. The Sunday after that, I went to the park alone, the one near her office. Her park, in the way that certain places become someone's after you associate them with a person long enough. I sat on a bench near the restored wetlands section she'd told me about once, watched the grasses moving in the wind, and had a conversation with myself that I'd been postponing for months. The conversation went like this. What are you doing? I'm protecting myself. From what? From wanting something I can't have. What makes you think you can't have it? Because I'm not. This is not who I've thought of myself as. Okay, and what is thinking of yourself as that? Buying you? Long pause. Are you protecting yourself, or are you protecting the version of yourself that doesn't have to make any hard choices? I watched the grasses move. You've been scared of this since December. 8 months of scared. What are you waiting for? What specific event are you hoping will make it easier? No answer. There isn't one. You know that. The walk back from the park took 20 minutes. I spent the first 10 of them building new arguments for why I should keep waiting, and the last 10 noticing that I couldn't remember the arguments anymore. That was the first time I let the word in. Fully, without immediately pushing it back out. I let it sit in my chest without fighting it, and I waited to feel what it felt like. It felt like something going quiet. Not relief, exactly. Quieter than relief. The specific silence of a sound you'd been hearing so long, it had become background noise, and then it stopped, and the absence was more noticeable than the presence ever was. I called Dana that evening. I need to tell you something, I said. I know, she said. You don't know what it is. I know anyway, she said. I've known since January. You lit up, remember? I laughed, and it came out a little wet, and she stayed on the phone with me for an hour, not telling me what to do, just being there, which is exactly what the right people do. The following Tuesday, I went to the coffee shop. I arrived before she did for once, and I was there when she came through the door, and I watched her cross the room, and I let myself watch, without apology, without the immediate redirect. She sat down. She looked at me the way she always looked at me. Hi, I said. Hi. A pause. Something reading. You seem different today? I feel different today. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Okay, she said carefully. I'm not going to say anything today. I just wanted to tell you that I'm working something out, and that I've been weird, and I'm sorry for being weird. She looked at me for a long moment. You don't have to apologize. I know. I wanted to. Okay. Still looking at me. Are you okay? And here was the thing. Here was the thing I hadn't expected. She asked the question, and I felt the full weight of what it would mean to answer it honestly. And I looked at her face, the one I'd been memorizing for months without permission. And I thought, she already knows. She'd known before me. She'd been waiting. I'm getting there, I said. It wasn't the whole sentence, but it was the truest one I'd said to her in weeks. She smiled. Not the covering smile, the right one, the real one, quiet and warm and careful, like something she'd been holding in reserve. Okay, she said again. Take your time. I think that was the moment I stopped being afraid of what I was about to do. Not because it got easier. It didn't. But because I understood, sitting across from her at that table, that the cost of doing it was nothing compared to the cost of not doing it. And that the cost of not doing it was paid not just by me, but by the version of this that could exist, that was waiting, that had been waiting patiently since a Tuesday in December, when she sat at the table beside mine and said, I noticed you first. 2 weeks later, I met her in the parking lot of the coffee shop at 3 p.m, and she caught me looking, and she said, See something you like? And I said, without planning to, You know what your problem is? You make everything feel like it means something. She said what she said. I got in my car, and then, 1 block away, I pulled over. Because here's the thing about the moment the story changes. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just arrives, and then you have a choice. And you can drive home and refile everything under tomorrow and someday and when I'm more certain. Or you can turn the car around. I turned the car around. She was still in the parking lot when I got back, leaning against her car with her arms crossed. Not in a defensive way, just in the way she stood when she was thinking. She looked up when she heard my car, and something in her face shifted, a small rearrangement, and she waited. I got out. I walked over. I turned around, I said. Unnecessary, obviously. She could see that. I see that. Because what I said was... I stopped. It wasn't about you. I mean, it was about you, but I said it wrong. What I was actually saying was, Jamie. Her voice was quiet. I know what you were saying. The parking lot was almost empty. A light wind. The distant sound of traffic. Her face in the afternoon light. I don't know how to do this, I said. I've never... Another stop. Starting over. I've spent months convincing myself that this was something else. Something simpler. And I'm not good at this. I'm not good at saying things before I know how they're going to land. But I think if I wait until I know how it's going to land, I'm going to wait forever. She uncrossed her arms. Didn't speak. Waiting. I think I've been in love with you since March, I said. Maybe before that. I don't know exactly. I know it's not what I expected, and I know I don't have any claim on what you feel about it, and I know this is... I laughed once, short, without much humor in it. Somewhat inconveniently timed, as parking lot confessions go. She was looking at me with that expression. The one I'd catalogued all winter, the deciding expression, the safe answer, or real answer expression. And then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. January, she said. What? I've known since January. She said it simply. I knew before you did. I've been waiting. I stood there for a second. You've been waiting. I didn't want to push something you weren't ready for. Sloan, that's been 5 months. I know. She smiled, and it was the real one, the right one, the one she'd been keeping in reserve. "You're thorough." I laughed, and it came out a little unsteady, and she took one step toward me. "I need you to know something first," she said, "before anything else." I waited. This isn't a small thing for me. I don't have feelings like this easily or quickly, and I don't say this to put pressure on you, but because you should know what you're walking into. If you're in, I'm in. Fully. And I understand that's a lot to hear in a parking lot. It's not too much. Are you sure? Because your hands are shaking a little. I looked down at my hands. She was right. "I've been working up to this for 8 months," I said. "My hands are allowed to shake." She stepped forward again, close now, close enough that I could see the specific way the light caught her eyes, and I thought of all the times I'd cataloged that, and told myself it was just familiarity. I thought of Priya's face at lunch. I thought of Dana saying, "You lit up." I thought of myself on a bench in a park trying to argue with the word for months before it finally won. "What happens now?" I asked, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to hear it. "Now," she said, "I'd like to get coffee, and not in the parking lot." A pause. "And then I'd like to figure out what this looks like when we stop pretending it's something else." That sounds, I know you're going to say, reasonable, she said, because that's how you feel safe. But it's also extremely exactly what I want, so... I laughed. Extremely exactly. "Jamie." Her voice went quiet. "I know you." 3 small words that went straight through me. Because yes, she did. She had been knowing me, the full version, the unedited one, the one that emerged when I talked about buildings and work I was proud of and things I actually thought, for months before I was ready to be known. She'd watched me run. She'd given me space. She'd said, "I'm here if that changes," and meant it without ultimatum or agenda. She knew me, and I knew her. The surprised laugh, the deciding expression, the way she stood in doorways when she was waiting to see if she was welcome, the way she said things carefully when she meant them most. We went back inside and got coffee. And here's the part that isn't tidy, because no real story is. I told my mother 2 weeks later. We talked for a long time, longer than I expected, in ways I hadn't planned for. There were difficult parts. There were things that didn't resolve in a single conversation. There are things still in process, still being worked through. My mother said, "I just want you to be happy." And I believe she meant it. And I also believe that meaning it and knowing how to show up for it are sometimes separate skills that take time to develop alongside each other. I told her that too. I think it mattered. Priya found out through the office grapevine somehow, which should have been mortifying, but was mostly just Priya saying, "Finally," over lunch, with an expression that suggested the entire timeline had been visible to her from a significant distance. Dana flew in from Seattle at the end of June to meet Sloan properly. Afterward, she texted me, "Okay, yeah, I get it." That text made me happier than it had any right to. There were people who got quiet, who needed time, whose warmth came back gradually, and I gave them that room. There were people who surprised me with how completely they showed up. Mostly what I learned is that the fear I'd been carrying, about what people would think, about what it would cost, was both totally valid and fundamentally not the point. The fear was real. The cost was real, and it was still worth paying. Because there is this. Sundays in the park. The walk where neither of us talks for 20 minutes and it doesn't mean anything is wrong. Her surprised laugh when something she's reading catches her off guard. The way she knows I'm ready to leave a party 15 minutes before I say so, and starts wrapping things up, and never makes me ask. The way, standing in a parking lot in October, she'd caught me looking and said, direct, unhurried, with that particular quality of someone who has been patient enough and has finally decided to say the thing directly. See something you like? And I finally had. The biggest lie we tell ourselves is that we'll be ready before we have to be. We're not. Nobody is. You build the courage mid-sentence, while the words are already leaving. You learn the shape of what you're saying by saying it. I spent 8 months trying to be ready, and then I turned a car around in a parking lot, walked toward the person who had been waiting, and said it with shaking hands. That's the whole story. That's all there ever is. If this one landed somewhere real for you, type courage in the comments. I want to know you made it here with me. And if you want another story, the kind that starts in the middle and makes sense by the end, click the video showing on your screen right now. Take care of yourself, and say the thing. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.